Hello and welcome back to another KCC video. I'm Rob and today we'll be jumping into malicious compliance. Before we start, please hit that subscribe button and click the notification bell so you know when the next video goes live. Our first story today comes to us from Cole Carmont. Teach you something you don't know? Sure, let's jump right in. Since my first story was extremely serious, I wanted to share a more light-hearted malicious compliance from my past. This one isn't as long. Going through school, I got involved with a volunteer first aid brigade through a friend who I will call Jim. Yes, the same Jim from my previous story. Turns out the bully was a volunteer first aider. As a result, I became one of the youngest medical first responders in the country due to how much work I put in. I was trained to use the AED, shown how IVs worked, not use them, hook up people to oxygen tanks, and other stuff you wouldn't be taught in a regular first aid course. I was age 14 and helped quite a few people as a result of my training and volunteer work. Can't say that I officially saved any lives though, but I digress. Shortly after getting out of high school, I got a job as a first aid instructor for a short while. Though admittedly my age, I believe I was 17 to 18 at the time, didn't really inspire much confidence in my trainees, as most were much older than me. In many cases, I was assigned to renew people's certificates rather than actually teaching. In other cases, my class didn't really take me seriously due to my age. I didn't really mind this, as I was passionate about it at the time, having the knowledge that what I am teaching could possibly save people's lives. In this particular class, my clients were a class of high school students who needed their basic first aid for their classes. I don't recall what for exactly. This is a 5 to 6 hour course that ends with multiple choice test, easy money. This was at the high school I went to, and surprise of surprises, this was a teacher I didn't particularly enjoy having. Not as bad as Mrs. Grump from my last story, but we still got along for the most part. But her way of teaching was awkward. It was a little difficult to describe without being in her class personally. She always acted as though the students knew all the answers but were too shy to speak. Even if a student said they didn't know, she would say things like, "It's okay to answer, nobody is judging," and stuff like that. As I was not much older than the students, they weren't listening to me. There was one group of students that kept shouting, "Tell us something we don't know." I know, the basic first aid course, at least at this time, was repeating the same thing over and over again until you're brainwashed to repeat it. But show some respect. Teacher, of course, no help. During the break, the teacher took me aside and told me to teach the students something they didn't know. A lot of the basic first aid is common knowledge and common sense. You're holding back. You know a lot more than what you are teaching. Show the students you know more than them. Okay, sure. I talked to the principal of the school, who I was in good terms with, about what the teacher said and the students, and with his and the master instructor's permission, I added in a little known module in the handbook to the lesson. When the students came back in, I started to talk. Some of you expressed that you want me to teach you something you don't know. Normally at this point, I would show you a video about asthma, but as I am sure everyone knows about it, I have gotten special permission to change the lesson. Everyone, please turn to Module 28 in the textbook. The students complied and a few gasps and chuckles echoed through the room. The teacher doubled over laughing, losing her own composure as well. So, admittedly, I will be teaching this directly from the instructor's handbook as I have never taught this module personally. We are going to be starting with a video. The class then proceeded to watch a 7-minute video on how to perform emergency childbirth. The video, fortunately, wasn't graphic, but certainly informative. Afterwards, I called the students that had been going, "Teach us something we don't know," to come to front and demonstrate the proper technique, using one of the CPR dummies as mother and a head as the baby. Finally, we discussed how to take care of the placenta and how to administer ongoing care. After the module, the students were extremely attentive to say the least. Now that I have taught you something you don't know, how about we get through the rest of the lesson without any more interruptions? The class complied, and no one interrupted me the rest of the session. Despite the malicious compliance, I didn't get in any trouble for it and continued to teach the classes for this school's first aid until I let my instructor's certification expire. The next time I went in, the teacher warned the students that I would teach them something they didn't want to know if they interrupted me. And that, dear reader, is the time I taught a class of high schoolers how to perform emergency childbirth. I doubt I would ever get away with doing something like this now, but I will always remember this moment. Now that I'm older, I can see the merits of that type of instructional video, but I can only imagine back when I was in high school how embarrassing it would have been to have been called up to the front of the class to have to demonstrate it in front of everybody else. Good work, OP. Our second story today comes to us from Natus FTW. Nope, still didn't scan. Let's jump right in. Texas has this strange idea that providing you a driver's license the day you go to the DMV is risky. As such, they give you a piece of paper printed out in black and white and mail you the actual license at a later date. This is a bit strange, as it creates a period where people carry a valid legal document that looks like a 5th grader pasted a headshot into MS Paint. This created an awkward dynamic when I worked at a gas station. What do people go to gas stations for? After gas, the most common things are lottery, beer, and smokes. All of these are age restricted and have rather intense laws surrounding unlawful sales. To help avoid the nasty fines, etc. associated with these, my gas station had a pair of rules. For anyone you're not 100% sure is over 30, ask if they are over 30, and card them if you're not convinced they're older than 30 after said answer. Yes, the question was stupid, but whatever. Scan all IDs to ensure they're legitimate documents and not fakes. At their face, these sound reasonable, though the second caused an odd situation where fancier states had 3D barcodes instead of magnetic strips, meaning I couldn't sell. And this story is obviously heading toward the paper the DMV gives people. Here's one such story. It's a small rush, 3 to 4 people in line, and a younger guy comes in to buy beer. I'm honestly not sure if he's 21, so he's clearly not 30. I asked the nonsensical question, because really, I can be fired if I just card him without asking the question. He tells me he's not older than 30. I asked for his ID, and he fumbles to pull out the dreaded paper ID. Now, the combination of Texas and my employer have put everyone into a frustrating situation. In addition to Texas using these silly paper IDs, state law also requires you to get an acceptable ID before making any sale once you've asked for ID. In other words, you can't ask for ID and then determine you believe they're old enough. If you doubt it enough to ask, you're liable for any sale. I see the ID and immediately feel bad. I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to take that ID. I recommend trying the gas station down the street that has different ownership and potentially more consumer-friendly rules. He provided the common response to ask why I can't take it. I explained to him the corporate policy requires I scan the magnetic strip of all IDs to verify their authenticity, and they've explicitly decided against waiving that for the paper IDs. He instantly gets furious and tells me to scan the ID. This one caught me off a bit, and I asked him, "Are you serious?" To which he told me, "Yes, now scan my damn ID." Befuddled, I take the folded up piece of paper and slide it through the magnetic strip reader. "Sorry sir, it didn't scan." This started a chain of events where each thing seemed more unrealistic. His response was, "You didn't even try." I asked if he'd like me to try harder to scan the ID, and he said he did. I looked at him confused and tried several different ways to slide this folded up piece of paper, unfolded piece of paper, slowly slide, quickly slide, used multiple scanners, etc. to get it to scan. Nope, still didn't scan. I hand it back to him and he's over the top at this point. It's also worth noting the line behind him is now about 10 people strong, including a few regulars watching in amazement as I'm remaining calm. He starts cussing me out and demands a contact for my manager. I pull out our paperwork and provide him a number for our corporate office. "No, stupid, I want your manager, not your corporate office." "Okay, I gave you my manager's manager." I gladly handed him the store's number, which would come to me, and shared the hours my manager typically worked so he'd be free to try to call. After he left, I made a point to apologize to each person in line for the extra wait, while each also expressed surprise I hadn't snapped at dude. Needless to say, he never made that call to my manager, though I don't know if he ever found his beer. Unfortunately, that paper ID is a necessary evil in a lot of places. We have the same process up here in Ontario, Canada. The new IDs we're producing up here have necessary security features that need to be printed at a central office because they have more sophisticated machines, and it just wouldn't make sense financially to have one of those machines in every single DMV or MTO office. Our third story today comes from OG Scyther. Don't train me properly, but want me to train someone else and do things I don't know how to? Well, that'll never end poorly. Let's jump right in. So this happened about a little over a year ago. I was living on my own for the first time while going to school and was struggling to get by after depleting what I had left from student loans. I started handing out resumes and filling out applications and got a job at a chain drugstore. My manager was a really good guy. He's in his late 20s, and from what I gauged during my time there, it was more inexperience than anything else that led to my undesirable instances working there. During the interview, he lets me know that they'll have me starting out as a post office clerk because it's the hardest to learn, and that he wanted every employee, new or old, to learn it at some point. This was because when I arrived, there were only 3 people in the entire store that truly knew what they were doing with the alien postal POS system. So naturally, it was difficult to schedule and they needed help. The problem with working at the post office is there are a bunch of things that are very simple to do, but there are also many things that aren't, which have tons of options and menus and specifics, and it's just a lot when you start to learn it. Redirecting mail from old addresses to new ones, opening and closing PO boxes, and even simply mailing something internationally all requires an elaborate string of menus. Think of it as a dungeon in The Legend of Zelda. Sometimes you get close to the final room, but you forgot something along the way. It's tedious and effing exhausting after a few hours when you sorta know what you're doing and have an entire line of people concerned that you don't know what you're doing. Laugh out loud. The girl who trained me was around my age, and while she was sweet and meant well, she wasn't trained to train, if that makes any sense. So instead of going through things in a linear way so that it was easier to understand, we were all over the place the whole time. I spent most of my first few shifts taking notes of the simple and common things, and eventually more elaborate ones, and organizing away incoming packages for pickup. I took notes for like the first 3 weeks, about 6 or 7 shifts. I addressed my concerns with the training, but was brushed aside pretty quickly and was told to just ask questions. I was thinking, I'll learn this eventually, and I did fully, over a month and a half after I started. In all honesty, I don't know where the training shifts began and ended, which is never a good sign. So at this point, we're about a month into me working there, and I show up to work to see one of my AMs, assistant manager, she's the focus of this here tale, with a new girl I hadn't seen before. This assistant manager was not one of the 3 people in the store that understood exactly how to do everything, but she could get by a little better than I at this point, undoubtedly. She introduces us and explains that today is her first shift, and drum roll please, that I'll have the duty of helping to train her. Well, I guess I'll just leave you two at it, aka I'll sit in the cash office and do basically nothing for the next couple hours. I do my best to give her the really easy stuff first and help her along. She's taking notes, looking at mine, and trying to help here and there before I just teach her how to organize the back room so I can get through the massive line that has conjured. I'm a little frustrated because I haven't got a break and it's been close to 5 hours at this point, me working alone at a post office without actually knowing how to do a third of what we do. A woman comes in after the line disperses and explains she wants to send some gifts to a friend in France. She takes out an Apple Watch, a piece of clothing of sorts, and something else with decent value that escapes me at the moment. Anyways, we find an adequate box to ship it in, and we get the address on it. Alright, so let me look like I know what I'm doing until I don't, and let me go ask my manager. I find assistant manager in the break room, which is where I probably should have been instead. What do you need? Yeah, so I haven't done a whole lot of international shipping, and this woman is sending out some pretty expensive things to France, so I don't want to make a mistake. Well, nobody else is here that can work there, and I'm on break right now. You've been here for a couple months, huh? So you should be able to do it by now. Well, I've tried writing down notes, and I've been doing transactions on my own a lot more. It's just that there's a lot of stuff to learn, so it's hard to get it all in up there, you know? You just need to go through it slowly. I sigh and go back, as I'm too tired to do anything but just get it over with. I asked the lady if she wanted to maybe come back tomorrow, as I was somewhat new and may take a bit of time to make sure everything is done properly, hoping she would agree. She didn't, and explained she didn't really have the time and wanted to do it now. Totally understandable, and I felt bad, but what was I to do? I just tried my best. What I haven't mentioned to this point is the wild amount of custom stuff and different form types we have in our drawers under the POS. I didn't really have the hang of which form was which for methods and duration of shipment. I deliberated with inner monologue and thought I had found the correct form and proceeded to have her fill it out and finish a transaction that I was not supremely confident in. Assistant manager finally shows her face a little later and asks me about it. I more or less just give her a thumbs up. I finally get a break a couple hours before my shift ends, and thankfully, the rest of the night is dead, and I teach the new girl cash out and leave. Somewhere around 3 weeks later, I get into work after having a couple of days off. Trainer girl is there and asked me about a woman who wanted to ship some expensive stuff to France. Before I explained that there wasn't anyone here, an assistant manager pretty much stuck me with it. So apparently, this lady showed up and went insane, exclaiming that I hadn't sent her package properly and that she was going to call the police before storming out once assistant manager told her there wasn't anything she could do about it, and that if her address was on it, then it should return if there are complications and can be refunded. I go to clock in and hear my name from the cash office to my left. David, I need to speak with you before you clock in. Sure, assistant manager, what did you need? Clearly flustered. Do you remember the woman who came in about a month ago sending expensive stuff to France? Yeah, I do. Well, she came in yesterday screaming at me about how she thinks you didn't send out the package properly because they haven't received it. And I had to calm her down and try to figure everything out, and you told me it was fine. I was having difficulties figuring things out and honestly haven't been formally trained, so I just tried to take it slow as you advised and do my best. No, she's effed up. Well, at least it's sorted out and she didn't call the police. I clock in while chuckling in my head and get onto my duties as a postal clerk. As someone who shipped out a lot of stuff through Canada Post, I've had both experiences in the actual post office and at the post office inside the pharmacies here. The ones in the pharmacies, it's kinda hit or miss. You might get somebody who knows what they're doing, you might get somebody who doesn't. But if you go into the post office itself, generally, you'll get the help you need and they'll know the system inside out. I guess it must be kind of universal that the training in the drugstores just leaves something to be desired. Thank you to all 3 OPs for posting their stories in the Malicious Compliance subreddit. They are linked in the description below. Please go and check them out. Check out one of these other videos, and if you haven't yet, please hit that subscribe button for more daily Reddit stories.